In this chapter, I'll discuss the audience for incremental code reform, how the approach differs from conventional code reform, and why we think that this is an approach that can appeal to nearly every community in Vermont. To give you some background to this work, CNU's Project for Code Reform was started in 2016 with the idea of meeting local governments where they are in their need to reform their local bylaws and land use regulations. The mantra of this program is, if you do nothing else, do this. The methodology is intended to help Vermont communities take concrete initial steps in the bylaw reform process with the fewest, most essential zoning changes necessary in order to enable better places. If bylaws are the very DNA of the built environment of Vermont's towns and villages, and it's so important to update them for current conditions and new challenges that arise in order to reflect the priorities of each community, then it has to become easier to change them. But if a town or village is looking to comprehensively, completely overhaul their existing bylaws, they face a feast of burdens. The process is expensive, it's complicated, it often requires the support of outside consultants, and it requires a great deal of time, political will, and public buy-in. CNU asked ourselves if it could be done differently, and this arc of engagement seen here illustrates how we see our approach. Rather than guaranteeing great places through complete overhaul of land use regulations and all of the resources that such an extensive process requires, instead, we can enable great places through small changes that will create the biggest impact. The methodology allows a town or village to test reform measures, determine if they need to make additional changes to them, map where the specific reform measures could take place throughout the community, and then adopt them in a more widespread fashion once they're proven to succeed. This is the gap that CNU's Project for Code Reform has filled, and that Enabling Better Places, a zoning guide for Vermont neighborhoods, addresses, identifying the essential bylaw changes that will have the greatest impact. By providing local governments with place-specific incremental code corrections, the Project for Code Reform's approach both streamlines and calms the process of reform. The formula is simple. Address the most problematic barriers first, build political will, and meet mayors and councils, municipal staff and boards, and other stakeholders where they are, financially and administratively. We've found that the audience that might embrace incremental code reform is not only local and regional planning staff or elected officials, but also community members and advocacy groups who are concerned about the way their community is designed and built and are looking for tools to help encourage change. Then there are state organizations like AARP Vermont and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and the Vermont Association of Realtors too, all of whom, with other state agencies and NGOs and trade associations, might be interested in supporting bylaw reform. The interest we've seen for adopting the incremental code reform methodology is broad, and it continues to grow. The goal of this method is to do the biggest little thing that is going to enable better development in Vermont's towns and villages. CNU's research on common obstacles and bylaws across Vermont is rooted in towns and villages that you share many things in common with. As I described in the previous chapter, the team of national code experts worked directly with representatives from 6 case study communities: Brattleboro, Fairfax, Middlesex, Castleton, Ludlow, and Vergennes, to establish what is working and what isn't for communities looking to provide a wider range of housing types to meet a changing population. Chris Cochran, Director of Community Planning and Revitalization at DHCD, said it well when he described the fact that this approach is about the few things that any one community could get comfortable with changing that might make big differences in the types of housing and the costs of housing and the location of housing in their town and village. In the next several chapters, Susan Henderson is going to talk about the details of the incremental code reform methodology itself and explain how to apply it to the bylaws in your town or village.